Well, we are excited today to have Trevor Lane with us. He is the leader of God's Abled Ministry and author of Victorious On and Beyond the Mat, which is his memoir about growing up with cerebral palsy and being on the wrestling team. And Trevor, thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am 23 years old. I have a condition called cerebral palsy, which is basically a miscommunication between your brain and the affected muscles. And it basically says, hey, I want you to stay tight all the time, and you're not able to relax those muscles. And so I walk with a little bit of a limp, but it was supposed to be a lot worse than it is. So I'm very thankful that God has been very merciful to me and has allowed me to be active in ministry and all kinds of different things.
The prognosis when you were born was a little bit was worse than what has actually happened. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I was born 4 months premature, and my doctors told my parents that I would never be able to walk, never be able to talk, and that I would be in a wheelchair my whole life. And that was not a very good prognosis, and they were probably very discouraged by that.
Yeah.
I started using a walker when I was 2, and then I had what are called Botox injections for my legs. And so they went in and they took a needle that's about this long, and they jammed it into my calf muscle to try to get the muscles to relax a little bit, and that helped to a degree. And then after some physical therapy, I got strong enough to use forearm crutches. And then after that, I had a tendon release surgery that stretched out my hamstrings, and that helped me to be able to walk independently. So it's been a long process to get where I am today.
So it sounds like you have been through a lot, especially with the different surgeries and different medical things. But I know Trevor outside of this interview, and Trevor, you are one of the most positive people I think I've ever met.
Oh, thank you.
How have you gone through all these things that are difficult, but stay as positive and life-giving as you are?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I had an incredible support system. My family, all of my friends. Growing up, I was never ever bullied at all, and that is very rare for somebody with a disability to not have to put up with any sort of conflict or any kind of bullying whatsoever. And my elementary school was built back in 1916, so you can imagine that it wasn't very handicap accessible.
Right.
And so, my teachers and my peers, they all helped me in whatever way they could to help me succeed. And then, my parents drilled independence in me as a child, because they wanted me to be as successful as possible.
Yeah.
Now, looking back on all that, I totally see that it was the hand of God that has been with me throughout my life.
Yeah.
And that's where the positivity comes from, is that we have struggles, but we can have joy in our struggles through Christ, and we could use our struggles to point people to Christ. I would say don't give up and don't take no for an answer. I mean, you have got to hit the ground running, and you've got to fight, and make sure that your child can be as independent and as successful as possible. Because more often than not, we can defy expectations. And so, but you have to be willing to put in the work and make sure that you don't quit. It's gonna be hard some days. You're gonna feel like throwing in the towel, but I promise you, that persistence and that consistency will pay off in the end.
Yeah. Well, you have just talked about a couple things we're going to hit on later, so I'm excited for that. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you, what is the greatest thing you have learned from living your life with cerebral palsy?
The greatest thing that it's taught me is that it doesn't define me. I have a disability. I am not like a cerebral palsy person. I am a person with cerebral palsy. And I think that, the greatest thing that it has taught me is that we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and that your circumstances don't have to define you.
I agree wholeheartedly. What is one thing that you wish that more people knew about cerebral palsy?
That cerebral palsy is not a one-size-fits-all approach. When people think of cerebral palsy, they think wheelchair, or they think, because your gait is off, you're mentally impaired as well. And both of those scenarios are not always the case. Yes, there are a lot of people who have CP who are in wheelchairs. And yes, there's a good number of people who have some kind of cognitive disability along with CP, but more often than not, that's not the case.
Yeah, so you would say the most important thing you could do is just get to know each person, right?
Yes, because no person with CP is going to be affected exactly the same.
Right. Yeah. You had mentioned in that sometimes people assume when they see someone with a physical disability that they also have a cognitive disability. In your book, which this is a great book, by the way, you guys should definitely check it out.
Thank you.
You had mentioned in one part that you had an incident with a young man who had come up and used the R word with you.
Yeah.
And when I read that in the book, I was really awestruck by the grace you had and how you handled that situation.
It was during a wrestling camp I was at during the summer. I was up in Michigan, and I think it was either the second to last or the last day of the camp. And we were getting a drink, getting a break, and this guy comes up and introduces himself to me, and he asked what was wrong, or what was wrong with my legs, which I get that question all the time. It doesn't bother me. So I told him, and he said, "Oh, well, I thought you were retarded." And I said, "No, I'm not retarded, but I do have a physical disability, but that doesn't mean that I'm below average intelligence." And he and I, we talked for a good 5 or 10 minutes, and at the end of it, he was asking for a handshake and a picture, and I said, you may want to think of another way of addressing somebody with a disability other than the R word.
Yeah.
Because it's very, people with the disabilities are not, well, you won't always come across somebody who is graceful or
right.
somebody could get easily offended by that. So I just said, hey man, you got to be careful about, how you word things and what you say, because um, there are lots of people with disabilities who have, completely shattered expectations.
Yeah.
And you know, I can't, the exact details of the conversation are kind of slipping me, but it basically boiled down to, hey, we're good friends now, but I was like, hey, be careful what you say.
So I don't know, how were you able to do that with grace without getting offended? How were you able to kind of have that conversation in a calm way where it did lead to a friendship?
Yeah. So I think, and to be honest, I think a lot of it, a lot of people who use that word are just that they don't know. Mm-hmm. And you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so, I think when we come to a situation like that, it's obvious, it's very likely that they were raised using that word in that way. And so you have to take that into consideration when you're talking with people. Mm-hmm. And so I think, when people truly don't know, you have to approach it with grace, or else you're just going to get rejected, and they're gonna push back more.
Right.
And so, yeah.
What do you think would have happened if you would have responded with outrage? What do you think how that would have ended?
We probably wouldn't have ended up as friends.
Yeah.
So I think, he would have been more apt to, maybe use that word again, or maybe that would maybe it would have confirmed some kind of stereotype that he had been raised with.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have gotten that opportunity to see, well, hey, just because you have a disability doesn't automatically mean that you are cognitively impaired.
Right.
And it also means that you shouldn't use that word to describe somebody with a cognitive impairment.
Right. That's right. When I read your book, this scene really stood out to me because, again, I know you in real life, and you are definitely someone who models Christ. When I think of people who model Christ well, you are definitely at the top of that list. But reading this scene in this book, I was just really taken with how much I felt like you modeled Christ in this conversation, because it would have been really easy to let your emotions get the best of you. But you didn't, and the way that you handled it led to reconciliation and redemption, I felt like. And that's why I keep talking about this, because I think it's so important in today's society, where if someone makes a mistake, then we cancel them. And, and I read this in your book, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is important, because yes, we all should be learning, like, what should we say, what should we not say, and be considerate of other people. But on the flip side, if someone says something offensive to us, it's also important how we respond.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I really wanted to talk about that, because I was so impressed with the way you handled that and everything that came from that.
Thank you. I think of a lot of times when Jesus was talking with the Pharisees, he responded with grace, but he was firm.
Right.
And he said, this is wrong. Right. And here's why.
Right.
And so I think, especially in today's culture, we need more understanding of where meet people where they're at, basically.
Yeah.
Is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And that's, in educating people about disability, or, reaching out to families affected by disability, just meeting them where they're at.
Yeah.
And going from there.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing about that. It's such an important message. Speaking about the wrestling team, so can you tell everyone a little bit, we won't give away your whole book, but tell a little bit about what made you decide to go out for wrestling?
Yeah, so I had actually been begging my mom since about fifth grade to wrestle, and she said no every time. But I kept bugging her for a couple of years, and the main reason that I wanted to was because I was a huge fan of professional wrestling, like WWE, and I thought, man, this is as close as I'm gonna get to the stuff that I see on TV. And so finally, I asked again when I was going into seventh grade, and she finally said yes. I think she got tired of me nagging her. But, so I talked with the head wrestling coach, and he said, yeah, absolutely, come on out and give it a try. I ended up loving it, and man, the rest is history. I didn't. My record shows that I didn't do too well, but oh my goodness, it was a blast.
So that was another thing that really struck me reading your book, is how we define success and how the difference it makes when we are up against things that aren't turning out exactly the way we want. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah. So I had only won in my whole career. I started to realize, well, hey, you might lose all the time, but you are touching a lot of people by going out on the mat and sharing your story, and I had the opportunity to be on the news and share my story on the news, and that blew up more than I ever thought it could. And and that wouldn't have happened if I didn't go out and try something that's hard for anybody without a disability to do, let alone with a disability. But man, God really worked in my wrestling, and He really allowed me to touch a lot of people, even though I didn't win a lot of matches. I think the most important thing is that you inspire people and share your story. That's more important.
Yeah.
Because people are going to forget about your win-loss record in about 5 years.
Yeah.
But they won't forget how you touch their lives personally.
Yeah.
And so I think that's much more important than.
Was it hard for you to get to that place when you were in it?
Yes, especially early on, like 7th and 8th grade. I would get so frustrated because I would work so hard to make sure that I'm able to get around as well as the other kids, and it seemed like that I had nothing to show for how hard I was working. And so I really, like, those first couple years were a big challenge for me, because I was trying to work through, well, if I'm not going to be successful, then I should just give up and quit. And I almost did. My freshman year, after I lost that first meet, I almost did quit, and I said, if something doesn't happen in this next match, if I don't at least come close, then I'm done. And lo and behold,
the guy was like, no, you're not quitting yet. No.
Yeah. So man, I just can't express how grateful I am for the community that I've grown up in, the support that I've had since day one. That's all key when you're raising a child with a disability. You need to make sure that you have a solid support system behind you, because I promise you cannot do it alone.
If someone's out there and they are raising a child who has a disability, where can they turn for that?
one of the things that my mom did was that she got me involved in Special Olympics when I was a kid. So to be involved in Special Olympics, you do have to have a disability, and you have to be at least 8 years old. But man, that was really one of my first exposures to sports. And then, my mom and dad communicated regularly with my teachers, making sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do. And so communication, love, support, and get you a few good friends behind you, and you're good to go. With the right support system, you will soar, I promise you.
So what would you say to people who maybe they don't have a disability, or they're not raising a child with a disability, but they see these families that are, because in your story, I felt like having this community support was instrumental. But I know that sometimes if you're not a family with a disability, you can feel like, I don't know how to approach this other family. What would you say to them?
Yeah, so man, families that are affected by disability oftentimes feel very isolated. They feel like that they're all alone. And so if you're somebody who does not have a disability, or is not raising a child with a disability, I would do all that you can to support a family that is going through disability, and it doesn't have to be something extravagant or huge. It could be something like, hey, I'm at the grocery store right now, do you need anything, can I get anything for you? It could be, maybe you want to do like a respite night for the parents so that they can have some time to get away. And just being there makes a world of difference. And maybe it's a shoulder to cry on, maybe, like I said, going to the grocery store for them when they need it. Very, very practical things. It's not always the big, huge things. It's the little things that make the difference.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So growing up in a family with a disability, with my brother had autism back in the olden days, before people had really heard of it. It can be very isolating for families. So I agree, it's the small things. And so even just reaching out and offering friendship to someone and not having expectations. So you accepted Christ as a teenager. How did that change your life?
Yeah, so like I said, I never grew up in church, but I had a foundational belief in God. And so one night I was scrolling through YouTube, and I came across this video that says, I know the day of the rapture. And so I clicked on it thinking, well, I believe in God, so I believe in the rapture. And this guy was saying, if you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you need to repent, because the rapture is going to happen on October of 2013.
Yeah.
And I looked at my calendar, and it was October of 2013.
Oh, no.
So I thought, oh, I need to get right with God.
Yeah.
And so that I literally asked Christ into my heart right there in my bed through that YouTube video. And that's how I got saved. But then, of course, October came and went. The rapture didn't happen.
Nope.
And so I kind of, fell off a little bit. And I started going to the church where I'm at now, Crossroads Church in Circleville. And I attended a revival service there. And, God just really spoke to me and said, hey, I've got to have all of you or nothing at all. So I went to the altar that night and rededicated my life, and, fully surrendered to God in that moment. And I haven't been the same since. And it's just been wonderful, wonderful experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing since then?
Yeah, so I graduated high school in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to go to physical therapy school because I wanted to be a physical therapist and help kids that were in the same situation that I was in. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep my grades up. So I actually ended up flunking out of PTA school, which kind of sucked. And I was like, man, Lord, what do you want me to do? And sometimes you just get that still small voice as clear as day. That I got one of those, and God told me, I want you to preach the gospel. And I was like, oh, okay. But while this is happening too, God is directing me to start a ministry for people with disabilities. And I had wrestled with God about this for a couple weeks. And finally, I just, it was that Friday, and I said, God, if you want me to do this, you have to give me a clear-cut sign that you want me to, because like I was thinking, man, I'm 19 years old. How am I gonna, do this? And I strike up a conversation that Sunday morning with one of my church, the people that go to my church. And by the end of that conversation, he says, you ought to start a ministry for people with disabilities. I think you would be really good at it. And I was like, wow, there's the sign. The first time that we had an event, we had planned for 100, and only one showed up.
Yeah.
So, but that one, she's on the autism spectrum, and she unfortunately was kicked out of her previous church because of some vocal noises that she makes when she gets nervous.
Right.
So she was really hurt by that. But she ends up getting saved, which is incredible. And her parents, her family, starts coming to church, which they hadn't been to church in 25 years because they were afraid of the judgment that was going to get cast upon their daughter.
Right.
And one of the most amazing things is, this individual that has autism, she has care providers, and these care providers help her to live independently. And so they take her to the grocery store, they take her, wherever she wants to go, and that includes church. And every single provider that she has been anything but a Christian. And so through their job, they bring Beth to church, and they have to sit with her. Well, they sit with her in the sanctuary. And so they get to hear the gospel too. And it's just amazing how God has worked through her life. And she's been very active in our children's ministry, and she's now serving in our card ministry where we send out cards to our shut-ins and things like that.
Yeah.
And so, God has really brought it full circle. We have brought her in church, and now she's serving with us in the body of Christ.
Yeah. The thing I love so much about your story, and one of the reasons I was so excited to interview you, is it feels like there's so many examples of where you thought things were supposed to go one way, but then they completely did something else that God did something amazing with. So
Yeah.
have you thought about that? Like, what if you would have just been like the best PT student ever? What would your life look like now?
Oh my goodness. Not any, really. Oh man. Totally different.
Yeah.
I would definitely not have had the opportunities
Mhm.
that were presented to me after PTA school.
Right.
If I would have stuck with it, if I would have been great at it. You know, my parents had drilled independence in me, like I said.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, you know, God comes along and says, "Hey, you have to depend on me." And that was very I really struggled with that for a while, because I was so used to, okay, what are some ways that I can accomplish this, and how can I adapt to this situation. But really, we have to depend on Christ instead of trying to rely on our own strength.
What helped you make that switch in your mind?
Well, definitely, definitely when I flunked out of physical therapy school, that was a big turning point, because in all honesty, I don't even remember praying about that situation, where God wanted me to go. I was just dead set on physical therapy.
Right.
I was going to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And God said, nope, you're going to do this. And so sometimes God has to grab us by the ears, and he's had to, believe me, he's had to do that to me many times, because there were so many times, like the PT school, that I wanted that, but that's not what God wanted.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's when you have that discouragement or that thing doesn't go the way you expect, I think we have a choice sometimes to be angry about it for too long, or, to feel bitter, or to be better and, choose to say, maybe your ways are higher. And I love how you've done that so many times.
As followers of Christ, we need to model, surrender to his will and what that looks like. And that we're humans too. And so I bet you we're not going to get it perfect every time.
Yeah.
But
Right, ever.
right. Yeah, but just to be that influence in people's lives, to say, hey, you might not be perfect, but we serve a God who is, and he promises to direct our steps where he wants us to go. But we have to trust in the Lord with all of our heart, and lean not on our own understanding. And that's where faith comes in. When you're not sure what direction you want to go, that's where we have to say, all right, God, I don't know, but you do.
Trevor, I know you are also doing a lot of preaching these days, kind of traveling around. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I actually started preaching before I started my disability ministry. So I've been preaching since 2016. So like right after I got out of high school, that fall I started speaking at different places.
Yeah.
And here recently, I've been asked to preach in some different states, and so that's pretty exciting. I share my testimony quite a bit, but I explain the importance of disability ministry. I was never raised in church, and so if a public school system and a family that is unchurched can help me out, then certainly the body of Christ should be able to come alongside you and support you and love you.
So, in your experience with God's Able Ministry, how has that helped your church?
Now that God's Able is incorporated into the culture of the church, um, when we're having different events and things like that, they'll say, okay, now what do we need to do to make sure that this is accessible to everybody? The culture within the church is really changing in a very positive direction.
So, going back to your book for a minute, can you tell us why you decided to write the book and what do you want people to learn from it?
So, I decided to write the book, in all honesty, because I felt like I had a story to tell, and I wrote it from a Christian perspective, because I really want people to know, yes, I was involved in wrestling. Yes, I have cerebral palsy, but man, it is Christ that has done the work in me. And I want people to come into a relationship with Jesus. And as you read, I'm sure you probably saw a lot of scriptural application to certain things, and there were several instances in the book where I expressed our need for Christ and our need to have a relationship with him if we want to get to heaven. And so I wrote that in the beginning because I felt that God was wanting me to tell my story, but ultimately in everything that I do, I want to point people to Christ. And so that's
Well, we are glad you wrote it. It's a great book. Can you tell people where they can get it?
Yes, it is available on Amazon.
We're so excited that you were here today sharing with us about your life and everything that you have learned. Is there any one thing that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Regardless if you have a disability or not, we all have challenges that we go through, and I just want to encourage you to give those challenges over to Christ. And I know that there's a lot of mamas who have children with CP, maybe about like I do, maybe a little worse. I just want to encourage you that it does get difficult, I'm sure, but do not give up. God has a purpose and a plan for every circumstance. He has a purpose and a plan for your child that he wants to use. I mean, I think of the passage in John chapter 9 where the disciples were traveling with Jesus and they came across this man who had been born blind. And the disciples asked Jesus, they said, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his sin or because of his parents' sin? And Jesus said, well, it wasn't because that he sinned or that his parents sinned, but so that the works of God could be displayed in him. And then Jesus goes on to heal the blind man. Now, if that man had not been born blind, then Jesus would not have been able to heal that man, and therefore would not have been glorified as much as he was. And so I just want to encourage you that, yes, you might have a disability. Your child might have a disability. But man, God wants to display his glory in and through that life.